No, that's not right. We get that wrong. I'll delete that from the tape if you would, sir.
Okay. Well, I just started recording because it's 8 o'clock my time.
It's
Good morning,
yeah.
y'all.
And
11
good
o'clock
morning,
your time.
guys. So you're all here because you read Dan's fascinating introduction to what we're doing here. Or it's a bad habit you got into every Saturday, I won't say Saturday morning. Anyway, Dan and I were talking the other day, as we occasionally do or frequently do, and we were talking about of all things caller training. And I mentioned that in years of doing caller schools and caller seminars and what have you, weekend.
I'm going to mute a lot of people. I'm going to mute a bunch of people here because I'm not sure where that's coming from. Usual, feel free to unmute yourself if. Sorry, go back. Now back to you, Don.
I just remembered that I tend to rock back and forth a lot and my desk chair makes noise. So if you have to mute me, go ahead. But it wasn't
Okay.
that ringing, but it wasn't that ringing noise you heard. And doing all these seminars, talking about timing or talking about showmanship or talking about choreographic management, there's one topic that caller coaches do regularly, and I did, which I found either both most enjoyable and most frightening. And that was critiquing callers. And the most frightening part was all these other presentations, I could write a script, I could have notes, I knew what I was going to talk about. And caller and critiquing, it just pops up. You've got to, on the spot, figure out what to say. You can't prepare ahead of time in general. So it was a challenge to me, but two of the reasons why I really enjoyed doing it is, one, it was a challenge and I enjoy a challenge. And two is that you frequently could get instant feedback that what you're saying actually meant something to somebody. You could see results. You could say, do this, if you change this very slightly, put a smile on your face, whatever it takes, and then have them call again, you could hear a big difference. And that was a nice reward, one of the things I enjoyed. We've talked many times about calling being an amazing job, art, whatever, because there are so many different things that you have to do. We don't have sound men working for us. We don't have publicists working for us. We don't have choreographers working for us. We have to do the whole bit ourselves. And the actual presentation also has many, many different parts. Timing, smiling, adjusting the volume, the balance of the volume between your voice and your music, the whole bit. And in critiquing callers, I would always do what I did with myself for many years, is recognize that there were many, many different things that you could go pick out. Morning, Keith. Pick out the one thing that that met two criteria. One was probably the easiest to fix, so we could just focus on one thing and then have them try again. And two was if you change one thing, it makes a little difference. If you change a different thing, it makes a huge difference. So pick on the thing that has the most effect, that the student would understand most easily and could make corrections right on the spot. And there was one situation, I was doing a weekend thing in Michigan many years ago, where I had to, all the local club callers called at the Friday night dance, and I had to take notes and then talk to them individually during the weekend rather than critiquing them on the spot. And so I made a checklist of all the things I wanted to think about. you'll see what that is in just a moment. And Dan, I should have passed that on to you. Well, I did, I guess. Maybe you can hopefully make it available to everybody so you guys don't have to screenshot or write it down.
I have it, and I will definitely make it available.
And so Dan and I were talking about this, and I sent a copy of this checklist to Dan. And then we talked about it a little and found out, gee, I just had abbreviations there. I mean, not just abbreviations, but a quick reminder of this is something I should be listening to. And when Dan saw these words, if I'm not mistaken, he interpreted some of them differently than I was interpreting them. And so we decided it's a twofold thing here today. We can talk about different interpretations of what my notes were. We can think of adding new things to it. But I guess the main thing we're doing is, rather than trying to give you guys something to critique others with, is give you a list of things to critique yourselves with. Again, there's so many things we have to do. And if you say, I'm a newer caller and I don't seem to be as great as I want to be, I'm going to fix it. Don't try and fix it all at once. Find the weak point. Find the point that's both weak and worth working on, and work on one thing at a time on yourself and correct that and bring the level of that up, and then go look for the next thing. Anyway, with that, I'm going to bring up the list, but Dan, have you got want to tell your side of the story?
Sure. Yeah, I just looked at the list, but I've had, so the story that everybody's heard, and sorry, I'm getting old and repeating myself.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. When pandemic started, I went from 4 hours a week of performance, for which I received all sorts of adulation. And oh, by the way, my little voice lessons on Thursday evenings, to all of that adulation going away, and an hour a week of the only time I performed for somebody else was that hour a week in which I paid somebody to be critical of me. And I needed to be very conscious, or I was like, I hate this. Why do I hate this? I should love this. And it took that, realizing that and understanding that and saying, oh yes, this is intentional and good, and I need to find my kudos and social things elsewhere to get over that. The other thing is that I've recently been motivated to actually do a lot of recording myself and playing that back and recording and playing back and trying it again. And I'm learning a lot about myself in that, and in the process of that, looking for things to critique. And as I went down Don's list, which I will post a link to shortly because I'm doing that in the background while I'm talking and using my hands, I found additional things that if I kept them in my consciousness as I was recording and playing myself back, I was all of a sudden aware of things I could correct and get better and do my own critique on. So that's why I thought this conversation would be useful for people, because there are so many little nuances as we go down Don's list, and we can duck into some of them and say, oh, this means this to me and something else to you.
I guess I do want to share one quick story. Back in 1970, I went to a school in Colorado. Earl Johnston was one of the instructors. I think it was a 4 or 5 day school in Colorado. It was great, great fun. And Earl, at the very beginning, said, we will be critiquing you people. We could either tell you how wonderful you are or tell you things to work on. And if you want to hear how wonderful you are, why don't you just come up after, in a few minutes, and I will tell you how wonderful you are, and you can go back home and save yourself the time and save us the energy. In other words, what Dan was saying, critiquing, you got to listen to it and believe it rather than just believe yourself when you think you're the greatest. With that, let me switch over to sharing my list. And I actually had it here. Yay. I guess I should make it smaller slightly so we can all see it. Or we can see it all. Let's make it. Are you guys seeing the size change?
Yes, we are. I would go for larger because, if we're talking about each element, then we can talk about each element.
That's what I figured. That's what I was just flipping to here. So you can see I created this in 1983. It's obviously not current, and you can do whatever you want. But just real quickly, communications with the floor, confidence, control of choreography and of the floor, enthusiasm, enunciation, flow, length of sequence, length of tips, the material you're using, metering, melody versus monotone, pitch, quality of voice, rhyming, rhythms, singing calls, whether you call them or whether you sing them or both. The sound of your patter, does it have a nice sound to it? What tempo were you using? Timing of the choreography. I'm trying to see if these were in alphabetical order. I know they're not in any particular. Could be. Does anybody want to comment on one of these things and what it means to you? And let me start with number 5, enunciation. If they can't understand you, they're not going to be able to dance to you, no matter how good you sound. I think of some of the rock music that's popular or some of the popular music that's popular, and the melody is important, the background music is important, the effect is important, sometimes the story is important, but where we're concerned calling, people have got to be able to understand what you're saying. Pick one, Dan, say something about it.
Well, I'll pipe in on enunciation. I grew up in a family that had a culture of tongue twisters and all of those other things, and the mid-Atlantic accent was encouraged. And as I get into my voice lessons now, my voice teacher is encouraging me to not do that and to slur a lot of things and to be less formal about it, which is great for the singing, but is not so great for the calling. So I have to make sure that as I work between the calling and the singing, to your points further down about singing calls, that I have to make those very distinct, different personas and voices as I go through them. The one I wanted to comment on up here, just as a starter, was your number 2, confidence. One of the things that when I was a newer caller all of 3 years ago, and the new callers, we would of course gather and encourage each other whenever we were calling together, would hold up a hand or something if they heard that lift in the voice at the end of a phrase. If you ever said square through 4, that was instantly all the new callers in the background would start pointing at you and waving to start that. And in the comments, we have Mel on communication on the floor. Comment, please.
Let me just give a quick comment on what you said.
Yeah.
When you make a call, I didn't think of it as the voice going up at the end, but tell them what to do rather than ask them if they can do it or if they should do it. You want to square through? Do a square through. Let's hear from Mel.
Yeah.
I'd like to say something also about that. It's very normal that the new callers do that. I did it for a long time, but then I could always say, well, I have heritage from Norwegian because that's how Norwegians are speaking.
Interesting.
Yeah, but
how long did that excuse last?
That's a case of an excuse rather than listening to the critique.
This thing is really important. My mentor told me once at the college school that I need to sound more sure upon myself. But then I said, how can I do that when I am so unsure of what I'm doing? How can I be confident and sound like a confident person? And then he told me something that I'm still using. He said to me, then lie. And I'm still lying 20 years later.
Thank you for the warning, Hannah. Was that banked?
How did you know that?
I think you told me once.
I think you're brave saying that in front of Lars.
Mel, did you want to put in your
Yeah,
2 cents?
you've got the comments there: enunciation, singing versus calling, calling versus singing at the appropriate places, the quality of voice. You know, there's pronunciation, there's enunciation, there's diction, all of that. A lot of people refer to that as communication. I don't refer to that as communication. Those are communication tools. I look at communication, and I'm really, really glad that that is #1 on your list, because communication is the inference of a dialogue. There has to be reaction and interaction and a dialogue both ways, either mentally, physically, or whatever. In other words, you have to communicate out, the floor has to communicate back. You have to generate that rapport to communicate with the floor. It's not just about what you call and everything else. It's the whole presence to create that give and take with the audience, because if it's one way, it just doesn't work. And I'm really glad you've got that as #1 on the list, even though it is alphabetical.
And when I put that as a note to myself to watch, I'm basically watching, is the caller working with the group?
Yep.
Is he seeing what they're doing? Is he accepting feedback and giving feedback? Is he making them feel like he's up there working with them, or is he just on stage reciting something and they could be dancing to a tape or what have you?
Yeah, one of the best callers that I ever danced to, he's unfortunately passed, but Paul Adams, when he was up there and he was really in the drive, you felt like he was in your square, even though he was on the microphone. And that's it. And I have seen callers that are beautiful singers, have perfect pitch, have great enunciation, great pronunciation, beautiful diction, and they're just dead to the floor because there's no back and forth rapport between them. So that was my comment on communication.
I want to hear from anybody that has looked at these things on the list and say, ooh, I never thought of that's one of the things I had to work on. Or what does he mean by that? Metering, for instance, is something that I didn't understand what that word meant for a long time, and I still have troubles explaining it. But
I have some notions of what I'd put in that bucket, but why don't you talk about that a little bit?
About metering?
Yes, and then we can get to Ed's comment in the chat about material.
Well, as I say, I still have troubles with explaining metering, but to me, when you're presenting doing patter calling, I like to have people use the music. And I'm afraid a lot of people with modern music just sort of put it on low and have it interfere with their calling in the background. I haven't been actively dancing for 25 years, so I don't know what the current thing is, but listening to a lot of stuff on YouTube. When you're, the standard way of teaching is Mary had a little lamb. You don't say Mary had a little lamb. You emphasize the beats of the song with your calling, and you also play with the melody of the background music, so that if somebody has no idea what the calls are, because they're non-square dance dancers, it still is a pleasant sound to them. It's working with the music in the background rather than having it interfere with you. From any of the other coaches, any better description of what I mean by that? Because or what I should mean.
Yeah, Don, if I may.
Yes, Walt.
Best explanation I could give you for metering. And metering and timing are very closely related. Metering's tough to explain. I agree with you.
Metering, I'm sorry. Metering is what?
Tough to explain.
Oh, I said that.
Yeah, you did, and I agree with you. The best explanation I could give you is metering is where you place the calls in relation to the music. All right, that's the best explanation I can give you. Your example of Mary Had a Little Lamb is a good example. We hear people who don't know how to meter. They sound like they're we call it out of step with the music, or the music is just background music and what they're saying has no relation to the music at all. That happens a lot, okay, especially with some of the alternative music we're hearing these days. So really, in my opinion, and we all know what opinions are like, metering is where you put the calls in relation to the music. That's the best explanation I can give you.
Well, I don't think of metering as being that closely to timing, but somewhat what you're saying is that way, Walt, in that I can say head square through when you go to 4, or I can say head 2 couples, then square through. So where I put the square through part in that phrase is a function of timing, how much lead time they need for getting the words. And it also falls into place with the music.
I agree.
Um,
I see a hand waving down.
Chris has his hand up, but Dan, you said somebody else had a comment first.
Well, I
thought
would
you saw
let
somebody.
Chris, if Chris is in this, yeah. Hang on. Ed asked for expansion on material, but if we're still talking about metering, let's let Chris talk about metering.
Yeah, I'm still on metering, because when I saw that on the list, I had no idea what it was, and all the different descriptions that people have given so far are all things that I say. But I'll throw out another word that nowadays has a little bit different connotation, but it was also a word that was used in country music, and so some people might relate to this word. The word is rapping. And I think that's basically what you're doing when you're speaking to the music, speaking with the music, and whatever. And another aspect of that is if you have certain kinds of music, you can time and present the words. And I'm mostly thinking of patter here, but I guess it comes up in singing calls too. I have to think about this more to try to explain it, but a lot of times there'll be something in the music where you can almost do sort of a call and response, like you'll be able to go head square through 4 and the music will go bump, 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 bump right after that. Those kind of things. I would also throw under that, throw in that whole category.
Don, if I may make further comment.
Go for it, Walt. Clark, you're next. Walt, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I agree with what Chris just said. An example of bad metering, and we hear it a lot, would be going back to what you said, Chris, about square through 4. Absolutely the worst filler phrase in our activity is square through, and you get me 4. Anybody guess why? It's a 5-beat word phrase. We try to jam it into 4 beats of music. That's bad metering. It simply is. Over and over again in caller schools, we hear callers trying to use that, and it immediately puts them out of phase or out of step with the music. All right? That's just an example of what I would consider to be bad metering. Good comment, Chris.
Clark, what were you going to say?
2 things. Before I was a caller, I ran tape groups and had a tape recorder, and we danced to tapes. So I had some tapes, and we were wondering how callers knew where to say the words. So we listened to a short piece of like Dave Hodson, Lee Kottman, and one other caller, and wrote exactly where the beats were, and exactly where they breathed, and exactly where they said words and what words they emphasized, and got into a very detailed analysis. And from all that, I learned exactly nothing about how to call and do any of this. Because I think a lot of it is hearing it, repeating it, and tweaking it, and getting comfortable with saying it while the music's playing, etc. So I bet we could analyze who's doing it well and who isn't, but how to train someone to get slightly better at it is a harder thing. So that's point number one. Point number two, and kind of an example of this, is I was at a place where Dave Wilson was coaching people, and the particular caller was not doing just the short sequence double pass through track 2 and metering that out properly. And Dave worked with him and dancers for a good 10 minutes to get him to get the exact feel of double pass through and then how long to pause before saying track 2. And just getting that little thing going better so the dancers didn't have a stop and go experience or a rushed experience, showed how important he felt it was to get that little piece of that caller's delivery smoothed out.
I was going to comment about your first comment, and I don't remember. Oh, I guess one of the things to do is listen to different callers on YouTube or where have you, and see which ones, forget about the choreography, forget about whether they're on pitch, just see which ones, and listening to patter, not music, not singers. And of course, most people record their singers, and just listen to which is a pleasant sounding thing, and then try to figure out what they're doing. I'd like to hear from somebody that's a newer caller that's looked at this list and either said, oh, I didn't think about that, I have to work on that. Or, oh, I didn't think about that, I have to work on that because I have no idea what it is. Metering happened to be the one that popped up first. But any other thoughts on, again, as I say, be aware that there are all these things and probably more, and you've got to figure out, you got to separate them into separate items and work on one at a time, and it will make a difference.
Something that we maybe talked about in the metering, or maybe it's something different. I don't know. What is rhythms? What's that one about?
Do you see that 1983 at the beginning, Chris? I don't know what I was thinking about back then. It has to, it's similar, I think, to the metering is how you use the timing and how you use the music. Where you put the emphasis while you're calling. I got confused when I read this because rhythm and rhyming look so much alike. I happened to, way before getting involved or thinking of calling, or even before square dancing, used to do some folk singing with friends, and there'd be some of these make-up phrases as you go along, and it'd be nice to have, if you thought ahead, just so the two parts of your thing would rhyme. And I had a roommate at the time, still a friend, still now a square dancer, who could think of good first lines but couldn't come up with rhymes. And I was good at coming up with rhymes. He'd sing the first line, I have no idea what was coming, and I'd sing a companion line that rhymed with it. But, and I found that invaluable when coming into square dance calling, just a natural thing. But there's so many things that I hear where, oh, heads promenade, go halfway around, down the middle, let's hear that sound. You know, just your fill-in patter. That wasn't a good example, but it's an example of what you mean. Just to be able to, you know, rather than the heads promenade, go halfway around, come down the middle and clap your hands. It just makes a difference with the overall presentation in it. And if somebody's horribly bad at it when I'm critiquing, or horribly good, not horribly good, extremely good at it, I like to compliment as well as point out things they can fix.
So I'll toss one in there on rhythms versus metering. If metering is where you say the words relative to the beat or relative to the phrasing of the music even, I was trying to develop the auctioneer sound of my voice. And I was at a shindig, and my wife actually asked Buddy Weaver, so how do you do that? And Buddy said, it's simple. You put the accent exactly where you don't think it should go, which is on the syncopated vowels. So rather than saying heads, square, through in the middle and give me 4 hands around, you say heads, square, through in the middle and you give me 4 hands around. So the vowel is getting, the vowel that is off the beat is getting the accent. And that changed the nature of my, after a lot of practice, and you can see that I'm not even really good at pulling it off on demand now, that changed my presentation a lot.
There is, I think the first thing you got to learn is to emphasize the beat of the music, and then you work on emphasizing the offbeat to get a syncopation feeling. But you don't call, my opinion, don't call that way all the time. You just have that as a tool for entertaining to make it different. But I suspect Buddy was doing a good entertaining, making it different at that point.
So how about material for Ed?
Oh, material. In other words, Ed put in the things. Let's talk about what material is. For me, it meant what's he or she, the caller, calling relative to what the dancers are capable of. Is it much too easy? And this is choreographic material. Is it much too easy for them? Is it much too difficult and too many of them are breaking down? Does he have a control over what he's calling, or is he just letting stuff flow out that he's heard? There's a lot of things there that we've talked about, difficulty before and all that other stuff. This is, and variety. Is it all the same stuff, or is it obviously a string of zeros and equivalents that we've all heard many times? I think that's what was going through my mind back in '83 as to what I was looking. So as I said at the beginning, some of these things meant different things to Dan than they did to me. I guess some of these things mean different things to me than they did to me. Any other thoughts on when you see thinking about material, what you would be thinking of? Well, you were in our announcement in the comments there talking about how Europe is different in critiquing than we are in the States. And part of critiquing, I mean, it's all a performance art, just like like calling itself. But part of it is helping the student by finding a weak point and bringing them into, telling them a couple hints that can make it better. Part of it is picking out the really good points and building their confidence a little by saying, you did that well, don't mess with that. I gathered that in Europe they're much more critical, and
I think the word you're looking for is brutal.
Brutal. Okay. Well, I've done caller schools in Germany and Sweden, and I've done the ECTA clinic, and I guess I didn't realize I was supposed to be more brutal, but I don't remember specifics.
You have
They
to
probably
be
thought you were just acting Norwegian and being very polite about
okay.
it.
The difference is, and it's partly a cultural thing, is, okay, let me give you an example. When I
Please.
do a caller school in the States, I'm very, very careful about how I would word something. For one thing, any critique, you start with something positive. Even if it's nothing more than how they hold the mic and how they smile. You always start with something positive. If I'm in the States and I want them to correct something, I might use words like, you might be more comfortable, or you might enjoy it more if you do this, or if you change this. Over here, I would still start with something positive, but I would say, you really need to fix this. This is not good. I would never use the words, this is not good, in the United States, ever. Okay? And with all due respect, American college students come apart when you say something like that, especially newer ones. Over here, they expect that. And I say part of it's a cultural thing. My wife's a high school teacher. I've been in her classroom when she's lecturing or when she's critiquing students, and they're very upfront about that was not good. That needs to be improved. So it's a wording thing. And it's a judgment call. In any critique, in calling period, the hardest thing to develop for anybody is judgment. All right, and we see good judgment in brand new callers, and we see terrible judgment in callers of our experience, Don, you and me. But yeah, critiquing over here is very, very different. It's much more not in your face, but much more direct about this is not good.
I
Change
see it,
this.
John.
So that's the best example I can give you.
Along those lines, I've found in presenting in general anything, whether it's critiquing or not, if you really want people to pay attention, and maybe it's different in Europe, but if you want people to pay attention to what you're saying, if you say something they agree with first, they're going to tune into you and say, this guy knows what he's saying. And
Yep,
then they'll
start with something positive.
then they'll listen to the opposite thing as you drift into that. John, what were you were waving your hand at us?
I don't know how many people here have ever been in Toastmasters. It's a speaking club where you learn how to be, speak out in public and not be bashful. It's a pretty safe place to be. But one of the big things in Toastmasters is evaluations. People don't learn anything unless they get some positive evaluations back to find out how they're doing, because that's what everything's all about, is evaluations. And evaluations in Toastmasters is one of my hardest things to do, because you have to be sort of critical and you got to be kind at the same time. And I'm probably along the lines of Walt. I'm a terrible evaluator, because I don't like to sugarcoat anything. I'd like to say, hey, you really didn't do this real well. You could have done this a lot better. And one of the things in Toastmasters is you don't really say what you're thinking. You try to give suggestions to say, you really ought to think about doing this, or you really ought to think about fixing this. So evaluations is one of my hardest things to do. And I understand the need for evaluations, but it is a tough one. And if anybody's ever been in the Toastmasters circuit, they'll know about a lot more about evaluations. One of the things that Walt was talking about, I think they call it the Oreo effect, where you give some positive feedback and then you come up with something critical, and then you sandwich it with another positive. So they get it's kind of a wraparound. It's a better presentation of critiquing somebody. So there you go. That's my thought.
John, I have not been in Toastmasters, but I've had several friends that have been, and I've once got around to looking for a local group. I don't know if we have any here or not, but it's a worthwhile thing if you're interested. It basically teaches you how to be an MC, I guess, but how to speak to a crowd properly. Good point. Good thing to get into.
Don, can I make another comment? Or go ahead.
Go for it, Walt. Go. No, keep going.
One of the hardest things about critiquing is trying to tailor it to the individual that you're critiquing. And if you're going to do, anybody that's doing caller training, when you critique somebody, for example, one of the things that we do is we always ask ahead of time, do you want a private critique where we shut the mic off and only the coach and you hear it? Or do you want it over the mic where everybody can hear it? All right. That's something that we think is important. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. It's been a long day with about 8 meetings. Tailoring it to the person, you have to be prepared. Some people do not react well to critiques. All right. Sometimes people equate the word critique with the word criticize. And of course, criticize has a lot of negative connotations. The two are not equal. A critique is a suggestion, a help. Let me tell you how to be better. Some people react very badly no matter how you do it. We had a lady in one of the schools in the States, and never met her before. She had about 10 years experience as a caller. She was in a group I was working with, and it was my time to critique. And I said, let me give you a suggestion. And she burst into tears. Literally, right there in front of the whole group. She burst into tears, laid the mic down, and walked out the door. I found out later when one of the other coaches came to me and said she has that reaction in every school. Ah, you need to be prepared for things like that. People will surprise you when you offer a critique. All right? And there's no standard. A new caller versus somebody with Don's years of experience, there's no standard. Sometimes the new callers take critiques like, oh, thank you, I'll go work on that. Sometimes the guys that have been around forever are like, you can't tell me anything, I know it all. That's a fact of life, and you have to be prepared for that when you're going to critique somebody. The other thing is, sometimes a critique coming from the opposite sex. I had a caller school that was all women. They would take a critique from me without a problem. From my wife was a different story. They did not like another woman critiquing them. And the opposite is also true. We've had male students that would take a critique from Julie, a harsh critique, that I probably would have got punched in the nose. Okay, so there's no set standard when you're critiquing somebody. Now I'll shut up and let other people talk. You're muted, Don.
I see that with the thing on my thing saying they can't hear you. Schools that I've attended as a student or one of the staff have generally say, we're about to do some critiquing. We're going to critique in front of everybody. And the person being critiqued may or may not get something out of this because they're going to be too nervous, but the other people will probably get a lot out of it. But occasionally we'll say, you know, if you don't want to be critiqued publicly, let us know. I did have one situation that I took the guy aside. I didn't want the group to know what I was saying to him. It just seemed better to say it individually. And because I didn't want to embarrass him. But I got through to him, and of course everybody could definitely see a difference. I found that caller coaches, they'll usually have you do something, they'll talk about it, then you'll have you do it again, and people will applaud it at the big difference. And as a caller coach, I think it's not so much that you've helped the guy, but he's had a second shot and he's not quite as nervous as he was the first time. I remember one case where going to a local callers meeting here as a newer caller or semi-newer caller, and Al Brundage was doing a thing for us. And I found in general that if I could hear myself and get my voice working before calling, it just gave me a little bit of a help or a hint. So I came up with a question to ask him before calling. And I said, what do you do to keep from, when you're really nervous to start? Because I knew that was going to calm me down a bit. I still remember his answer. When you're worried about, and we were using 45 RPM records, when you're worried about bouncing the needle down on the record, you use your other hand to turn the volume down, bounce the needle down, and then turn the volume back up again. But just my little talking helped calm me down. So of course, everybody gave him credit for calming me down. Yeah, I'm rambling. Sorry about that, guys.
So two suggestions. One, since we're kind of more into talking now, we can stop the screen share so we can see each other's faces. The other is that Cynthia had two comments in here interspersed in, and I think one of them goes to floor communication and material and touches all sorts of things. She said, I know that some callers think they need to break down the squares. And I would say that I think that that breaking down the squares can be part of putting a narrative arc which is fulfilling into the story that you're telling the floor. But maybe talk about that a little.
I think Mike's got his hand up.
Yeah, I see Mike's got his hand up.
Yeah, on the critiquing, sometimes you just got to do it, not privately, but right in front of everybody else, especially if you're running through some choreography and you're trying to reset up the setup at the point of time where the person made the mistake and show them what they did. So you can't get around that.
Yeah.
And
Clark had his hand up, and then Chris is waving his hand.
and Keith too.
Yeah.
I had a couple of comments on the communicating with the floor topic. One is, I seem recently to have been watching a lot of TV that's on like America's Got Talent or The Voice. And in terms of communicating, if you watch the new nervous person come out who's about to perform or sing, and the panel asks them a few questions, what's your name? Where are you from? You can see how quickly some of the people establish a good rapport with either the panel or the audience, or on the other hand, don't. And I think as a caller, when you're getting up to call, be it one tip or something, there is a slight opportunity to do that same thing. I don't know how to teach that, but you can see the people who have it and the people who don't. And it predisposes everyone who's about to listen to the performance or dance to you to be in a better frame of mind and expect to enjoy it. Another place where you notice the difference between communicating with the floor versus not is when you dance to tapes. Because when you're dancing to a tape of a caller, he clearly isn't up there watching you or doing anything. And you notice that dancing to tapes is a bit of a flatter dance experience than when you're in a hall with the caller who's in the second by second, noticing what you're doing, interacting, adjusting his performance to how the floor is doing. So I think those are some comments on that.
You muted, Don.
Chris or Keith, you both had hands up. Go for it, one of you.
Yeah, I'll say this about that. As confidence, there's being confident and then there's acting like an ass. And there's a fine line between the two of them sometimes, really. So, you know, the trick is to exude confidence and, but not be, if you've done something that's wrong and everybody knows it, I mean, you might as well admit it. I've seen some very, very graceful handling by some expert callers on, you know, when they made a mistake and they crashed the floor, you know, like Deborah Carroll Jones, she's, you know, she's, oh, but geez, I just blew that up with a big old 500-pound shotgun, you know, and she's so cute that nobody really cares, you know, and she's still confident, you know, she knows what she's doing, but she lets you know, hey, I made a mistake and I know it too. Communications, there's other things to communications besides what you say. And a lot of that, you know, communications, I think I like the idea of you have a dialogue going on with the floor, because when you do that, they're saying things too, but they're not saying them. You've got to watch their body language and their face language. I mean, beyond the obvious fact that they all just are standing around and you just broke down all the squares by something that you did. And as far as breaking down squares on purpose is concerned, that's a matter of judgment. I mean, you know, some people, that's why they come square dancing. They want the challenge. They want to have this, and you know, and oh gosh, our square made it, and look at all of the wreckage all over the floor. That's a big thing, you know, especially a challenge and that kind of thing. But you know, some people just come to dance and to move, and you don't want to keep them standing around for too long, you know, and it just depends. It depends on the floor. It depends upon the level. It depends upon what you're doing. It's all a part of judgment. And the other thing that I said a long time ago, you could add to your list, and I was in calling for a club where this became a major issue, especially with the caller before me, is watch how long the dancers are off the floor. How long is your break? You've got to be very careful about that. I mean, if you all of a sudden start taking 15 and 20 minutes breaks, you will turn them off. You know, talk with them, find out what they think is reasonable, find out what their energy level is. You know, people told me we want 5 minutes and nothing more. Hell, they didn't even want to give me a chance to go to the bathroom. Why these groups? You can work it out with them.
I want to throw in a quick comment about breaking down a floor. A couple of you have mentioned, and I just want to quote one of my mentors, Jim Mayo. Many years ago, he told me, or he told the class that I was in, anybody can break down a floor. It takes a caller to keep them dancing. Just think about that.
Cindy's got her hand up.
Yeah, I want to comment on Keith. I love that you say to own your mistakes. Yes, we should own our mistakes. Nobody is perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. But if you're making multiple mistakes every song, there's something wrong. And I know callers that do that. Yes, they own their mistakes, but they're doing it numerous times in one song, and it happens all night long. That's not good. You need to make sure your calling is correct. As far as breaking down the square, thank you, Don. That's exactly what I was thinking. I love to dance. But if a caller has broken down every single square and just keeps going, that's not good for the calling and for the dancing or anything. And also, I agree with breaks. I hear we have one club in Arizona that they do rounds between. And so it makes it pretty, that's a really good option to make sure your breaks are there and not too long.
Yeah. And if you don't have a round dance cure, you can, you know, and you've got a bunch of people that like to line dance, you can either yourself or find somebody in your club that really likes to lead line dances and, you know, and teach them and whatnot, and let them do that for 10 minutes if you need a longer break, you know. So
exactly. Perfect.
As far as breaks, in my experience with it, when in most of the clubs in New England do have round dancing also, so you get they time your breaks for you. But if you don't have a round dance, I asked a caller many years ago, how do you time your breaks? You know, some people say, oh, I put the record on once, let it go through once, and then the record's over. But this guy told me that people want to socialize. They're up there, they're talking to each other. Let them talk, don't interrupt their conversations. But there will be a time during that break when everything goes quiet. And that means they're done. They're ready to get up and dance. And I found that to be very true. And you tune yourself to it. You'd be in the middle of a conversation with somebody doing obligatory go out and socialize, which was one of the tough things for me. But you just hear that background lull, and that's when the break is definitely over. And that timing to me seems to get a little longer each tip. As the evening goes on, they need a little more, either they need a little more rest time, or they need a little bit, or they get to know each other better and need to and socialize a little bit more. But just tune into that lull. And that happens with our groups here too. And when we have conversations, and I've mentioned that before, we know, you know, even when we go past the hour, that it's time to stop because there's a pregnant silence. You can, and if you tune yourself to it, it's amazing. Just listen for it at your dance or another one. Chris?
Yep. Well, just to go sort of in reverse order, somebody told me that it was like about 40 years ago, and I've always found that works out great. Oh, it was you. So now on the subject of the owning your mistakes and so forth, if there's any new people, there's the issue of confidence versus owning your mistakes, and some people sort of touched on that. And you should always definitely admit when you screwed up, and not because I think the worst thing is to blame the dancers for your mistake. And if you broke everybody down, that was also probably your mistake. I don't know how much you need to apologize for that. It depends on the group and the kind of stuff that goes on there. At some super hard dances where people are expecting that they kind of want to be broken down almost, then you might not apologize so much. But generally, I'm known as a very technical caller, and I try to call hard and interesting and whatever stuff. And if the floor goes down, pretty much regardless of what level it is, then I think that was a failure on my part. So in case any new callers are wondering, no, you're not supposed to break them down. You're really not supposed to. Now on the confidence thing, one thing I've seen some callers do occasionally, beginner callers, is they'll apologize while they're calling, more or less for no reason. There are some people who are just very overly apologetic. That's just part of their personality. And it's a thing that can sort of interfere with their performance. So you definitely want to be confident and not apologetic about what you're doing. Totally
it's a Canadian thing.
Is it? Yeah, totally contrasted from owning your mistakes, which is a sort of a separate issue. And now I want to wind all the way back to the how to critique people thing. And I'm going to first point out that I have never run a caller school. I mean, I've worked with a few callers over the years, one-on-one and stuff, but I've never done a school. I have done thousands of classes where I was teaching dance students who were, doing performances, and that involves a lot of personal critiquing. And most of those classes were not private classes; they were small group classes. And the technique that I used there was I'd be individually working with the people and giving them their critiques in private, just to them. And after going around the room and doing a few of those, because it would be basically, okay, here, let me tell you something. All right, you go practice, and then you go to the next person. It's the same thing. And then you bring people back together and say, okay, well, and then you get up in front of everybody and you say, one of the things I've noticed that everybody is having trouble with. And at this point, you're not blaming anybody or embarrassing anybody, and then you can talk about that particular thing. Because what other reason is there for getting up and, if the guy's on stage trying to learn how to call, critiquing them in real time, there's sort of two kind of things you could be critiquing them about. And one of those kind of things is pretty personal, their personal style, delivery issues, and all those things we talked about. And that's really probably best, because you never know how badly it's going to make them feel in their personality or whatever, or how receptive, or just what's going to happen. It's almost always better, I think, to do those things in private. Now, there is a thing that I would critique, I think, if I were up in front of a bunch of people doing this with a caller up there, is somebody mentioned the choreography. That's an example of something that I would critique, because it's a lot less personal to the person. So I wouldn't feel too bad about being up there and saying, okay, nice sequence or nice tip or whatever we just did, and say, but you notice, and then talk about the choreography issues that might have been there. Those are, people certainly invest, a lot of time, especially beginners, in getting that choreography that they've written just the way they want it, whatever. But at the same time, it's more of a work product that you've produced that we can critique in some more objective fashion, versus the private stuff that I'm going to say to you off of the stage, just to you. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on all those things, and the trick of waiting for the lull in the action to know when to start the next tip.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Don told me that a million years ago, and it's always served me very well. Good trick.
We have reached the top of the hour, or at least within less than a minute. I'm going to grab the mic and make the official closing, and then get into the good part. And when we get into the good part, I have one quick Jim Mayo quote, then Walt's been raising his hand. And then I would like to hear from somebody we haven't heard from before, preferably about having been critiqued or that they see things there that they should think about that they haven't before on the list, what have you. But we have done a full hour very quickly, as usual. It goes by quickly. This was the Dan and Don show today, with no real guest speaker. Glad to work with Dan as usual, and glad you guys have come out and participated, and hopefully, again, made you think and made you think about things to improve your calling, so that your dancers will love you more and love dancing more, and our activity will regrow again. I was going to say continue to grow. I'm always an optimist. And as usual, if the time has come that you only can devote an hour to this, you can go away without offending anybody. I don't take offense, I take criticism. With that, a quick Jim Mayo quote, another one which was relevant to something somebody was saying, and now I can't even remember what it was. Oh, maybe I'll interrupt with that later. Walt, you had some stuff to say, go for it.
I'm curious about these things you guys call breaks. You need to come to Europe. We don't have those. Back me up on this, Hannah. For us, a break is just about how fast you can change the music. Literally, our dancers don't even walk off the floor. So breaks, I need to come visit you guys.
It's really a shock going to Europe and calling and not being allowed to take a breath in between tips.
Absolutely.
When I'm still sorting through my 45s and which one am I looking for? So MP3s have made that a little easier, but boy, you don't get it.
Europe used to be, that's why they had a round between tips so the caller could catch his breath.
Some of the clubs that I call for, and I guess this is mostly the gay clubs, which tend to be multi-level clubs. So they'll do a class level or something, and then they'll do a plus, and then maybe they'll do an advanced, and they'll be going down the line like that. And whatever the program is, depends who's there and how many of each you get and whatever. But the thing is, they don't take any breaks. They'll take like a 30-second break at the most. It's you're working hard.
And they aren't paying you more.
Hey, Don, I got a comment on your list.
Go for it, John.
Well, one of the things you got on your list is it's evaluating other people evaluating you. But one of I think something that you could add to your list is how sociable are you? How outgoing are you? How well do you work with other people? Are you user friendly? I mean, there's the calling aspect, but when you're not calling, people want to, you got to be a meet and greeter, glad hander. You have to mix and talk to people like you've mentioned before. And that's something that somebody isn't going to critique you on, but you should put it on the list so people can think about that as they're calling as one of the things that they need to be good at. And Walt, I've been to Japan a number of times. I've been to a lot of their festivals, and they publish a list of callers, and there's a caller one caller is off and the next caller is on, and it's like every 10 minutes they rotate through, and this goes on for probably 4 or 5 hours. So it's just a constant roll of callers through there. So I know what you're talking about. You get enough time to break one square, find a new partner, and build another square. So it's a constant roll.
John, their idea of socializing in Japan is if you want to socialize, go out of the hall. If you're in here, you're here to dance. Yeah. And trust me, as fast as one guy's coming off the stage, the next guy's on. There's no messing about.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of hard to do that if you only have one caller in your club, though. But
Bill, what have you got to say?
I just had a comment being a newer caller about the break situation. I've run into situations where I was at a dance and I get caught up in the conversation with the crowd in between. There's a way to get around that. If you're using Square View, there's a little coffee break timer. If you queue up your next patter record, set that timer for, however long you want. I usually do about 6 minutes max. The music will start playing. And that's when you can just say, oh, excuse me, I got to go back up on the stage. And it breaks that conversation. It's also good at classes, too, when you've got some of the angels that don't want to get off their butt because they want to socialize. And I run into that all the time at the club that I teach. And it gets them used to saying, oh, there's the music. We got to get on the floor. Just something that I've run into that I wanted to share with everybody.
Anyone else? Thoughts, comments? Clark? Are you one of the new people that hasn't spoken yet? Go for it. Unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Making that mistake. I took notes. So one of the comments, especially since you mentioned Jim Mayo, is he offered a service. I don't know if he still does or whether any of you other coaches would be interested in doing this, where you can send him an audio tape of one of your dances and he will critique it.
I think I mentioned that maybe in one of my classes that Jim used to do that. Or maybe he was just talking to Dan.
I think Jim also mentioned that not many people take him up on that offer. So either he needs better marketing or people don't really want to know what someone thinks about how they're calling. But I think if you're working on self-improvement, it's a good thing you can do. And you could even do it during the pandemic, as long as you have tapes of some of your other dances.
I think he might have been ahead of his time. That's becoming very common now, especially with like golf swings and whatnot. You send in video of your swing and the pro critiques it, but it wasn't, years ago, you went to a golf pro.
Right.
So maybe he was just ahead of his time, Clark.
Yeah. Also, you're right. Today, we could easily capture video of you calling and send it to someone. Another comment is under your category of material, I wrote a note saying calling with a purpose. You don't just call head square through four, swing through, boys run Ferris wheel because you just wanted to string some calls together. Presumably you called it because you were trying to set up double pass through track 2 or something. And you should know what you're doing and why you're doing it and not just have it be kind of spontaneous combustion. And I will stop there. I have more, but.
Why did you stop the sequence there? Oh, those are all the calls I know.
Yeah.
A lot of people preach about square dance calling is more than just choreography. Choreography is important to get you through stuff, but hopefully that list of things that I posted earlier and Dan did or will post where to get a copy of that, where you can add your own things to it, like John wants to do, but hopefully that'll help you understand that it's a lot more than choreography. Your whole how to present, how to entertain, how to keep yourself and others sane. Anybody we haven't heard from that had some glimmerings of, oh, that's interesting, I should think more about that? You mean we didn't?
I had just a comment to make about the enunciation part.
Yeah.
When I was in grade school, I went to choir class and the choir instructor told me, you will never be able to sing because you enunciate every word too well. But when I started calling, it is exactly why the students that I have and the dancers that have danced to me have said, I can understand what you're saying. So what was negative as a kid has turned into a positive.
I can hear the clear words now. Many a party night I've done where people will come up after the first tip and say, I understand you. Yes, it surprises people because what they've heard of square dancing in the background is blah, 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 blah. And that's all it sounds like to them. Yes, Cece, go for that. Let them understand you. Make lemonade out of a lemon. Is that what they say?
Goes
Good
part and
job.
parcel of what you said about sing the song, but call the calls. There is a very strong distinction between the two.
And you should do both. Too many people on singing calls worry about the choreography, getting people through it, but they don't emphasize what the song is about, whether it's a love song or a war song, and tell the story at the same time. And then there's the other case that people are really good singers and it sounds great, but they don't know how to emphasize the calls. And so dancers enjoy the sound of it, but can't dance to it. And they're both separate things and they're both important. And again, it's one of the things that I would try to pick out and critique.
Got Yolanda, Carol, and Phil here. I'd like to hear specifically like anecdotes, if they're willing to share, of anything that they've been critiqued on and what they were really looking for as opposed to what they got and how it made them feel.
Carol, go ahead.
My very first critique at calling school, when I've not done any before, was like what Walter just said. They liked the way I held the microphone. That was all I got. And at the time, I thought,
please tell me that wasn't me, Carol.
I don't know. It might have been.
That's going to be a running joke now forever.
And at the time, I thought, oh, that was all right, you know. And then afterwards, after a while, I thought, oh gosh, I must have been that awful. Is that's all they could think of? And funnily enough, that's the only critique I can remember, other than the last caller school I went to, and Walt said to me, don't bounce up and down. I was bouncing with the beat of the music and he didn't.
I remember that. I really do. You did a great job, but you were going this way.
And given the number of people I've seen with really bad mic technique, you hold the microphone really well is important.
Yeah, bouncing up and down is not so much an issue anymore because the record needles don't skip. It was very easy to learn, but yeah. When I was teaching one of the schools, I actually had to balance cans of soup on people's toes to stop them from dancing and bouncing around.
It's interesting to watch some of the round dance cuers while they're cueing. They're all over the floor stage.
I did notice halfway through today's session that I did not have mic technique on the list of things to critique people about. But yes, mic technique is very important. And it's something that different coaches coach you differently how to do. And it's a matter of knowing a bit about the mechanics and the acoustics of a mic and how they work. And that's a topic of another subject. But yeah, that should have been on the list.
Each one of those is a topic.
Carol, there are times that I've told people, or maybe I've told myself, that when somebody critiques me on a minor thing, that's a good thing because they couldn't find a major one to critique me on. Everything else was right. So keep that in mind.
There's a lot of material in the discussions on here that should be noted for people who are preparing presentations on stagecraft and presentation and showmanship and that whole area. A lot of good stuff.
Am I hearing the silence?
No, we want Yolanda.
Yes, I was unmuted. I wanted to say something, but I'm just waiting my turn. So part of it, first of all, I never asked for critique in the beginning because I was too nervous because I was too new. And then when I started asking, one of the things that was mentioned was go and record yourself and listen to yourself. And then it was like, okay, now I have to figure out a way to record myself. And so then the technology part of it got in the way, right? So then I started recording all the sessions, but I didn't know how to actually listen to them and sort them out into subsections and stuff. So I've had to find somebody that showed me that part because I was too embarrassed to say, I don't know how to do this part. You know, how to find a way to critique myself. I don't have the technical knowledge. So, and then everything started breaking down, and I spent more time in the last couple of weeks trying to figure out how to have my equipment working, and things going wrong as we're working on the computer stuff. It's taking up a lot of time just to be able to do that, right? So I'm finally getting to the point where I can start hopefully listening to the tapes that I've been recording, you know, of the tips I've been doing. I mean, this last week, I think I've spent 20 hours. We were working on some stuff and accidentally put everything on the cloud. and then the cloud filled up totally and blocked all my emails and everything. So we spent 2 days doing that. So having a sense of humor about that, but it stops me from actually taking the suggestions that I've had about listening to myself, and then because I don't want to ask anybody more for critique until I've actually done that part, right? Like, I've been given information, but I need to do that. But I'm getting very close to being able to listen to the recordings I've been making.
Hopefully, Yolanda, that this list that I showed will help you when you're listening to yourself. Listen to it through thinking about one of these items, and then listen to it thinking about one of these other items. And, you know, don't listen to the overall package. Isolate it into all these important parts, and know that they're all separate, even though there's some overlap. And hopefully that's what we're gaining out of today, is learning how to help critique yourself. And by listening to a tape, that hopefully that list will help you.
Yes. And second of all, and this is really funny, everybody can laugh, but there's a new caller that's secure, but wants to learn how to call, and they're asking me for critique. So this is going to be really helpful for that. So, I mean, I can help her because I can hear her, but I couldn't critique myself because I couldn't hear my taping. So, so that was the hard part, that I've got all this new information, but I can't put it to use yet. So, hopefully in the next couple of weeks that will change. I'm this close.
I've got a question for Walt and Julie and Hannah and Lars. Do you guys ever dare to critique each other? You don't
I
have
was just thinking about that.
You don't have to
Hannah,
answer that.
One of the most, I don't know if I would call it detailed, or it was at a GSI school in Sweden, one of the first ones that I taught at. And I asked Hannah for a critique. And she quite literally, she listened to me call, and she came up and gave me a big smile and said, "I don't know where to start." I was never sure how to take that. No, she gave me yes, we've had the opportunity several different places, I think. Am I correct, Hannah?
Yeah, but I think that Don means if we individually want to critique our partners.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Yeah. Yes, Julie and I do it all the time. I thought you meant had Hannah and I had a chance to critique each other.
I was looking at the couples out there that were.
Oh, my apologies. Yes, Julie and I frequently, because we work together almost every time we call.
Yeah,
so
but
there's. Go ahead.
But do you dare critique each other? Actually, let me give you a critique, Walt. You weren't listening to the question correctly. Hannah got it right. So never mind.
I just wanted to make a nice comment about Hannah. So.
You guys practiced that beforehand, didn't you?
Absolutely.
We are out now.
Well, the question was on a critique where to start, but today we've learned the answer to that. The place you can always start is microphone holding technique.
Yes.
We actually, Julie and I, over the years, because we've been working together 17 years now, we have developed to a point where, yeah, we're pretty honest about our critiques. Generally speaking, our critiques between each other are private, all right? And it goes over a range of things. Hey, that one doesn't sound good. You ought to change the music. That last note was flat. This sequence doesn't work. Things like that. Okay. But yeah, we're pretty straight out with each other. Occasionally, when I'm the one receiving the critique, it's why in the world did you do that? So, but yeah, we do often. Hannah, your turn.
Yeah, well, Lars is so kind. When he critiques me, he always is saying a couple of words, and those words are always, "That was beautiful. That was wonderful." So I don't feel that I got much help.
But sometimes there is the word "but" afterwards.
Yeah, not often.
But having a partner who is also a caller, an experienced caller, is just valuable beyond belief, because she hears me call so often and she can pick out the things that I'm doing wrong or that I'm and let me tell you folks, I've been doing it 40 years and there's still things to learn. There's still things that you don't get right every time. And having her point that out is extremely valuable.
I found, I hadn't thought of it, but that I get critiques from my partner also. And they're not so much square dance related as just general presentation and what have you. And when I stop making excuses and actually listen, they are quite helpful. Your partner doesn't have to know the ins and outs of every square dance thing, although partners generally can't avoid knowing quite a bit about it.
So Don, way back in the beginning, you had mentioned that you wanted to hear from a new caller about how critiquing made them feel. I did have that experience once at one of the caller schools, and it was quote unquote the Oreo effect. I had a very prominent caller come up to me and say, look, you've got almost the whole package. Everything is good, but you need to work on this one thing. And then they finished up again with another positive comment. And I walked away from that feeling pretty darn good about myself. Don't be afraid to accept critique from these guys. These guys have been doing it for years. And sometimes you need to swallow that negative pill in the middle. But being sandwiched between the positives like that was a good experience at a caller school for me. And the other thing about critiquing one another, I continually work with Denise Carbonell. She's kind of like my calling buddy. And the two of us right now are involved in recording music with Fine Tunes and Goldwing. And we're always running things by each other, looking for that, what do you hear in this that I'm not hearing type deal? What should I change? It's good to work with other callers, even if you're new.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, Phil, I hadn't heard the Oreo effect called that, but when I eat Oreos, I enjoy the middle part more than the outsides. We should find something like.
I just used it because somebody else used it.
Yeah, I know.
It used to be called the sandwich effect, but Oreo is a better description.
The reverse Oreo, right?
Yeah. One question, Walt, Hannah. One of the things when I went to caller school in Europe, it was learning self-critique was one of those big things in introspection. They used to give us a list of key notes, and under everything, when you record yourself and listen to yourself, they'd say, take these and put 3 questions under each one of these before you start listening and critiquing yourself, and answer these questions individually. It was more of a guide to actually be honest about yourself and about critiquing somebody else. Do they still do that over there?
Go ahead, Hannah.
No, I haven't heard of it. But my comment was not upon that. Maybe Walt can answer that also. I was thinking about one of our callers came to class one day, and he asked the dancers to give him critique on anything they could come up with, which was a very good idea. And he got so much better after that because he got a lot of good critique that he could change and make himself better. One of the things was that after each call, almost he would say, "You do," and he was not aware of it. Like square through, you do. Slide through, you do.
Do a right and left through. Do
Yeah.
a another
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
So it's a good idea if you don't have a partner to give you the good critique that you need, ask your dancers for it. And the dancers are really proud to be able to be a help.
To answer your question, Mel, sorry, Don.
Sorry. Yeah.
I was going to say, of course, in the long run, your dancers will tell you overall by either showing up at your dances or going to some other dance. They critique with their feet, but that doesn't help with the individual components that we're talking about today. And like Hannah said, you're specifically a caller, a teacher, a dancer. I knew it was a word there. My first wife and I used to play this game, Who Am I? Every caller we used to go dancing to had their own quirk of how they particularly bounced around, leaning to one side, or how they held the mic, or what have you. Every caller has their own quirk. Some of them don't get in the way, some of them do, but the extra words and getting in the way of rhythms and metering, as well as just being repetitious to the point that the dancers focus on that rather than the calls. It's a good point.
When you're talking about feedback from caller schools, I have found that immediate feedback is the best feedback, because when they give you feedback the following day, when they see you in class again, you've slept since then, you've done a million other things, you don't remember what you did. So immediate feedback is important.
Good point, Janet. Clark?
And I just wanted to honor
Dan. Clark had his hand up, but you had your mouth open, Dan, so go for it.
Sorry, Clark, I'll let you in after. I just wanted to acknowledge the value of learning enough that you can hear the critique or the levels of critique. Just watching myself, I am told by my wife, who's pretty much the only person who hears me sing, that my singing has improved dramatically over the past year. And as I listen to various singers for reference on that, I'm now hearing things that I didn't know to hear or didn't know to listen for before. And in going back through Don's list, every read through gives me a new, oh yes, I should be listening for that this time. So anyway, over to Clark.
There's a great video. It's kind of long, but I've watched it several times and recommended it to people, called The Last Lecture. And one of the comments the guy in it makes is, when people stop giving you feedback, you are in a bad place. They've basically given up on you, be it in a classroom situation, in life, or whatever. So you need to be in a place where people are free and comfortable giving you feedback about your performance. And on a separate topic, kind of a loaded question, especially for the caller coaches out there, what about the people, the newbies who attend caller schools who are hopeless? What do you say and do to them? And I might have a follow-up on that.
Can I address that, Don?
Please, because I don't want to.
Okay. Fortunately, Clark, fortunately, it's really rare. Okay. I think in my entire career, maybe twice, I've had to say to somebody, look, this may not be the thing you want to do. Now, somebody who's coming to their very first caller school, maybe they've been calling a month or something like that, I would never tell them that, because there's no way to tell that early. One example I can think of is in a school in the States, we had a gentleman who said he'd been calling for about 2 years, and he had absolutely no sense of rhythm, which in itself is very, very rare, right? And probably the worst speaking voice I've ever heard. I can't tell you why. I lost Clark. He moved. Where'd he go? But we went through the whole week's school. We worked with this guy every way imaginable. We had 5 coaches there, and we all spent personal time with him. And in the end, I had to say to him, if this is where you're at after 2 years, this might not be the hobby for you. And you just have to be as gentle as you can about it, and at the same time be honest about it. Because there are people, fortunately, very, very rare, there are people who are not going to make it as callers. They're for one reason or another. All right, I say they're very rare. I've only met 2, maybe 3 in 25 years of coaching callers. And of course, you never want to be brutal with them. We had one over here. We had a lady over here. And fortunately, my wife was the one that dealt with that. And she had to say to her, look, this is not working. This is, this is going to be extremely hard, hanging on by your fingernails work for a long time. That's the best answer I have, depending on the person.
Walt, can I
People
just
with no
add
sense
on
of
to that?
Go ahead, Mel.
Sorry, I thought you were done.
Now, people with no sense of rhythm, you can work with. We had a guy who swore up and down he had no rhythm at all, and we took an electronic, I can't think of the word.
Metronome.
Metronome, that's it, and sat him down and had him counting with that metronome over and over and over and over. And by the end of the week, he could do a singing call. All right. He didn't know how to feel the rhythm. We had to teach him that. That's very rare also. Go ahead, Mel. But Mel, I have a question for you.
Okay, you go ahead first.
I saw a post you posted earlier today about being old and crotchety. and I was going to reply to that, but my wife was reading over my shoulder and she said, oh, there's 2 of you.
Well, yesterday was, what was it? Grumpy gray-haired old man day, and I never even got an acknowledgement. So I'm quite happy about that.
Clark, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. Now, what I was going to mention was you said it's the same with dancers and it's the same with callers. Don't be hesitant to be brutally honest with somebody if they ask you to be brutally honest with them, or to do it out of a kindness. There's nothing more unkind than encouraging somebody who's just not meant to be a square dancer or is just not meant to be a square dance caller. And there are people out there like that, and encouraging them to continue and continue and to continue. And eventually what happens is they feel the negativity that grows towards them. By the same token, what I wanted to add on is a very good caller in Canada, in the Ottawa Valley, was critiquing, and he actually said that to a dancer who was very, very enthusiastic about being a caller and had absolutely, the social skills and the gendering ability of a teaspoon, to steal a line from Harry Potter. He was told, this is not for you. You're never going to make a caller. And that guy went out and said, I'm going to prove you wrong. Came back the next year to the caller school, and the improvement was remarkable. So sometimes being brutal is a good thing. Never do it in a harsh, cruel way, but you do have to be very honest with people. And sometimes it will hurt, but just as long as you qualify it beforehand, it will work. And people have thick skins. They can accept honesty and sincerity a lot more than they can cruel. And that's what critiquing is. Positive, 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 things to get positive, more positive, things that you can make positive that aren't working. It's development. Thanks.
I ran into a situation similar to that, except it involved dancers who had finished the mainstream program and wanted to move on to plus. They were horrible dancers, and they kept asking me, what do you think? What do you think? So I kind of had to learn on the spot what Mel was saying about, you got to do it with kind of kid gloves. And basically I told them, until you feel comfortable enough that you can do the calls in mainstream and know the definitions by heart, that's when you'll know you're ready to move on to plus. So that kind of smoothed it over and got me out of the situation of saying, you suck. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's part of the rapport building. I had 2 couples in Perth, Ontario that I was calling for. It was a club run or an executive run club, and they wanted to graduate all their new dancers. And I refused to sign the graduation certificate for 2 of these couples. But I had a really good rapport with them. I worked with them constantly. I've had them over to my house teaching. They just took a long, long time. They were they're still dancing today up at the plus level. I failed them 2 years at basic, and they came back the next year and took it again. And they came back the next year and took it again. And I graduated. You know, if people want to do this, they will. But if you build rapport and you've got a good relationship with these, they'll accept honesty. And I think you're pretty much in the same kind of experience. They'll accept it from you as honest and sincere. Sorry, Hannah, I saw you had your hand raised. I didn't mean to jump on you there.
Well, it's true, but you have to find the right words to say to people. You cannot just say any words to critique.
Yeah.
If you have something like you can give them an option to do something to make themselves better dancers or something like that, it will be taken much more kindly. But what I wanted to say, we had a color coach in Sweden a while ago, and he used to say when people ask him, because they always did ask him for his opinion about their calling, and he would say, that was his standard answer, do you want to hear the truth or should I lie? And very many people said, we want to hear the truth. And then he told them, and they hold a grudge to him. They didn't like what he said. And once I asked him too, and he said that to me too. And I said, well, lie. And since then, we've been very good friends. But it's a good way to respond to somebody asking for critique, because not everybody is ready to receive critique that is maybe not what they wanted to hear.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, who put that comment up earlier that when they asked for critique, or I just missed it because it went through the chat, they asked for positive critique and said the most positive thing I could say about your performance was, that's a really nice sweater. What was that in content? I missed. I couldn't find it going back, but who made that comment?
Keith did.
Opening comment, you know, when you say something positive and then you continue with critique. I was in this one group one time, and we had to do critique of each other. You know, it was a class, and one guy was kind of a clown, even more so than me. And he said that nice sweater, you know, would be a good thing to open with. And it's just a joke, really.
Always start with something positive. Always. Can I just make a comment, because I'm going to have to leave you all in a minute. My wife is in another meeting working with our 2 student callers, and I've got to go over there in a second. One of the neatest things about coaching callers, and I'm sure Don will agree, is when you have a student who's struggling with something, there's just something that they just can't get, and then something you tell them or something you do, and all of a sudden that you can literally see the light come on. I got it. That's the neatest moment in coaching. It really, really is.
Yeah.
Before you leave,
thank you. I've got to leave you.
Okay, actually, well, can you
stay for one quick second, because there was
Sure.
a hint I had for you. Generally when I do schools, people, as far as rhythm, very frequently they have their own rhythm, which happens to be different from the music behind them. And you use the metronome to do this, Guy. I didn't realize how much I was entertaining people by what I do, but I stand quietly behind them and tap them on the shoulder with the music, and they immediately sync up with the music. And when I think they're going solid, I'll let go. They're with it for a while, they drift away, I start tapping them. It's a good way to make them aware of the music and keep going with that. And as I do it, there's longer periods of time that I don't have to touch them on the shoulder. But at the end of the school, they frequently critique me by banging me on the shoulder. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Well, can you just check your chat before you leave? Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Another few comments for Clark. Well, I've had some students in caller schools that it was pretty obvious they didn't even want to be callers. They just were there as an exercise in caller appreciation. They learned the fine points of what callers do and don't, and so they knew which callers they should like even more. And then I had somebody in one of the classes who complained about that very point. She used to say, she and her husband, we used to go dancing. We go dancing all the time, and we used to like everybody's calling. And now we realize how bad some of the guys are, and we don't enjoy as many dances. So she was complaining about it, but just a different way of looking. And one last question for Clark, because I hate to hog this, but you mentioned a video that you've watched several times called The Last, and I kept repeating.
Dan put it in the chat.
Did he?
Okay. I put it in the chat, Randy Pausch, The Last Lecture, and I will, of course, toss it on the links of the YouTube comments as well.
Okay. I was busy looking for
splattered everywhere else.
So missed it.
So the reason I brought up the question for coaches and what do you do with the impossible student, and it also is applicable, as has been mentioned, to callers teaching classes and having dancers, is I've been reminded, I think by Don, that he had some dancers who were impossible to teach, and they kind of stuck with it. But in the end, they both made it and have become some of the strongest supporters of his club, you know, be the presidents, the ones who greet people, you know, whatever it is. As a newer caller at my first caller school, that would be in 1980, I think neither Earl Johnson nor Al Brundage had a clue what to do with me. And out of the 30 or 40 callers there, I'm sure they had me on their least likely to succeed list. And I'm not your normal typical caller, but I'm still calling and I've contributed to the activity. And had they discouraged me too much or just told me, here's your money, son, you know, please go away, you're wasting your time, that would have been a disservice. So my bet is it's almost always a disservice to prejudge people and not know how and where they're going to fit in with the great wide-ranging activity we have as square dancing. I also could not call with the beat of the music, and at Don's caller school, he used the tapping me on the shoulder, and I could be synced up with the music until he stopped, and then I would slowly drift away, and he never understood how I could do that.
Anna?
Yeah, about judging people, it's not uncommon that somebody that has all the things that you need to have as a caller, like good judgment or not, maybe not so good judgment, but a good voice and as a skill of doing good choreography, doesn't always keep on. They get a talent, but they are not working with it. So as long as it comes free, it's okay. And then they stop working with it because it's not fun anymore, and they disappear from the activity. Whereas the people that seem to have troubles in the beginning are so persistent to make themselves better. They stay in the activity and they contribute a lot to the activity. So I learned a long time ago not to judge people from the beginning when they are new, very new at this.
Possibly the thing that Clark said, I remember, it's an incident of exactly that. I had a club and I had an older couple that really struggled with the dancing. Very nice people, but they were struggling. And at the end of the year, end of the series of lessons, when we tried to invite people to join the club, she came over to me and apologized that she was brought into square dancing by another couple, but that other couple's club met on a different night that she couldn't make. So she came to our classes. And then all of a sudden her night freed up. So she was going to 2 classes. And I'm thinking, oh my God, you're having that much trouble here and you're going to 2 classes and still having that much trouble. Of course, I talked her into the fact it's okay to join 2 clubs. You've got a social group here you can enjoy too. The summer went by, fall came, we had a party to get the group started again. And she could dance better than anyone else because her enthusiasm going to 2 clubs, and she was the one that she and her husband were the ones that continued over the summer. And it, you know, it just took her longer to learn, or took them longer to learn. It was not a matter of that they couldn't, it just took longer. And they were good dancers. And you know, many years later, her husband passed away and she got a new partner. And probably 25 years later, she came running up to me when I was calling up in New Hampshire. And she said, "So good to see you again." And she was still bright and shiny eyed and the life of the party. So it just takes some of us longer than others to learn things. Doesn't mean you can't, doesn't mean you have to reject them.
Hannah.
Hannah.
Go ahead, Hannah.
Like you said, I was talking about callers before, but now I would address the dancers. There are some dancers that are struggling a lot in the beginning, and they can be better if they do it more times than other dancers. Exactly. But there are also dancers that never will be better. They learn very slowly. They learn, but very slowly. But we discover that everybody in our activity has something to give to the activity. So the poorer dancers, they are so dedicated to the club. They are there every time making coffee breaks and bringing cakes to the club. So they do contribute in some way to the whole thing altogether. And they realize themselves where to stand when they are supposed to dance. They don't go to next levels because they know that they won't be able to dance there. And I always tell people that enjoy the level you know you can dance at, and then you can have the joy of dancing instead of trying to go to the next level and be afraid all the time for making mistakes.
I agree with that.
Seems like we've hit that lull.
Let me give you my last 2 thoughts. I keep a list, and these are the ends of them. When we were talking about when you give feedback or a critique, do you tell the truth or do you lie? Or do you give the person the option of, do you want the truth or do you want me to lie? The phrase I use, not just for critiquing, but when someone asks me a question in general is, and when it's something that I know I have something harsh to say, I'll ask, do you really want to know? And that's enough of a warning, a verbal warning, that if you say yes, you're going to get an earful about some subject that you probably didn't realize was really upsetting me. But that's the phrase, do you really want to know? And my other final comment is absolutes versus suggestions. Often I hear callers parrot back to me that their coach said A, B, or C, and that's the way we must do it. And I think there's very few absolutes in our activity, and you have to develop a good judgment on who you trust, what you believe, how strong you believe it, etc. But I don't like hearing all these absolutes that I have to do it this way because that's what my caller or my coach said. And then the comment about judgment is, how do you get good judgment? Well, it's from making mistakes and bad judgment and learning from them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Dan, we did it. We figured out, we came up with a topic that seemed to be of enough interest and draw enough conversation from people that I've learned some things, and hopefully others have too.
I'm quite pleased with the way the discussion evolved here. And yes.
My comment on that, Don, is this is a topic that is not discussed enough, especially amongst caller mentors, caller coaches, and caller teachers. It's something that should come up at least every year as part of a curriculum, or even just a a social gab amongst callers that coach or teach other callers.
Absolutely. Yep.
Go ahead. I heard a woman's voice.
I said absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, we hadn't thought of it as a presentation, but just we're talking back and forth, and all of a sudden it sort of evolved, and I'm pleased with all the contributions that we had thinking about this, and hopefully it has helped some of you think about, you know, we could we could make a similar list, Mel, of things that caller coaches could be critiqued on. But that's,
yeah. Well, I said we've done critiquing or introspection and whatnot twice on ours. It's a topic that's coming up again. That's why I put on Facebook. It's an excellent topic. I was kind of hoping there'd be a lot more people participating today in yours, but there are a lot of CALLERLAB meetings on today, so I fully understand that. I was looking at your list and I was saying, well, you've got your next, 20 weeks of presentations, because every one of those topics individually can be a 1 hour presentation with a 3 hour discussion at a minimum. So it is something that so much goes into it that is just overlooked. It's like programming. It's like delivery methodology, like building rapport in itself is a topic in itself that callers need to learn that skill. Dan mentioned syncopation. Syncopation is one of the hardest skills to actually learn, but it's even harder to teach what it is and to understand it effectively. All of those are excellent topics on their own, but they're things that are left off caller training curriculums for the sake of teaching site resolution first, then teaching a module, then teaching the chicken plucker, then teaching basic choreographic management. And we seem to go, excuse the phrase, but back-asswards in a lot of the way that we approach this. So I'm very happy with the topic, and I think you should do it more often, because I know I will be.
Yep.
And
Dan,
with that,
do you want to make some closing comments, Dan? Or
I think the topic has stood on its own. I don't have any particular closing comments. And I will, I have a bunch of documents that I will link to in the comments, and including the Randy Pausch lecture. And thank you all for coming.
And I look forward.
Thank you for having this topic. It was really helpful.
Yeah.
Dan and Don, could you guys hang around for a second? I have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
Please.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. The rest of you. I look forward to reading the chat. I don't do that while we're going.
See y'all later.
See you later.
See you later, Mel.
Bye.